Alrighty then. Well, God willing and the creek don't rise, the microphone's actually working this week. Hi, I'm Keith, and this is Game Dev Coaching Office Hours. Let's talk about some questions. Okay, first question on the queue today. What should be in an employee handbook? Okay. I will start off by saying this. I've seen a few employee handbooks over the years. I have seen one that was very clearly made by an attorney or possibly a corporate HR person. And this was for a startup, right? So this is like 10 people or something along those lines. And they did not need a 20-page employee handbook that had super corporate jargon. But they had hired somebody to do the thing, and they did the thing. And their experience, their background was clearly a big corp. So I have seen that end of the spectrum, where it's all policy and corporate, cover your butt, make sure we don't get sued, these kinds of things. And then I have seen a ton of places that have no employee handbook. Okay, so that's very common. And then I've seen a few places that have done they made some sort of an effort at a bespoke handbook that meant something to them. Some of the better ones that I've seen, I would say in general, here's some guidelines. One, make it short. Because the idea of a handbook is that hopefully, this is the idea. I guess there are a couple schools of thought here. One, we're going to put as much policy in here as we possibly can. So we're going to make sure that there are enough walls and gates put around people's behavior so that if there's ever any sort of disagreement, an employee argues about why their employment was terminated, these kinds of things, the company can say, well, they had to read this employee handbook right here. They had to read it and sign it before they could start the company. And it's clearly stated right here that you don't get to do the thing with the stuff, which is what they did, and that's why we fired them. Okay, so that's one school of thought. We're going to policy the crap out of this thing. Another school of thought is we are using this handbook to do our best to encapsulate what's unique about our company, the culture that we have. So I will tell you the best example of this. And I'm kind of patting myself on the back because I contributed to this a little bit for a client job. But I really didn't do much because the first draft was fantastic. This was for a game company called Studio Mayday, I want to say, in New Zealand. And this is, I don't know how many years ago now, 5 or 6 years ago. And what I liked about it was that, yes, they had a few things in there about how to handle things in the office. If it's after hours, you lock up or you talk to this person, or if you're out of printer paper, then you emailed this person, whatever. They had maybe some guidance around how to take time off. Okay, so they had a few basics, but a lot of the things that they covered in there were things about what made the company different in the way it handled things. So here are the sorts of amenities that we want to keep in the break room for people. So we're not going to provide you with lavish meals, but we want to make sure that there's some sort of snack available. And if you don't find anything, then let this person know. Like just a little bit of guidance around that. It was clearly not let's cover our butt against all contingencies, legal kind of document. And the way that they chose to phrase things, the way that they chose to discuss overwork and how they were going to prevent it, the way they discussed how to keep everybody safe. If you are traveling somewhere for business, if you're at an event or something, here are the methods of transportation that we want you to use, and here is our guidance for keeping you safe, like don't get in an Uber alone, like whatever. they really laid out some things that you wouldn't necessarily see in every employee handbook. And the things they chose to talk about gave a clear indication of how much this company cares about the well-being of its people. So the original question, what should be in an employee handbook? Well, I guess that answer is contingent upon you deciding, do you want this handbook to be attorney fodder, or do you want it to be representative of your culture? And I'm not entirely sure you can do both. I think you kind of have to choose, because as soon as you have an attorney writing some of this boilerplate stuff with whys and wherefores, and the language will very clearly paint a picture of the organization. So if you want to get away from that and actually state the kind of culture you want to have, I don't think it can be a total legal cover your bottom attorney fest kind of thing. I don't think it can be that. So I think you have to choose. So once you make that decision, then the things that need to be in the employee handbook. So my preference on it is this. It's the old school Netflix culture deck way, where they said, listen, we aren't going to have policy for everything at all. We aren't going to tell you all of the guidance around things you can possibly use your expense account for and these kinds of things. What we're going to say is use good judgment. And then if we need to put in some sort of exception handling for bizarre edge cases that come up, okay, we'll create policy later. But 4 times out of 5, what we're going to rely on is use good judgment. So my preference in an employee handbook would be that we use that guidance. That we say, listen, we're not hiring people who need their hands held, and we aren't hiring people who are going to say, what, a company credit card? I'm buying a jet, right? That we are hiring people who have good judgment, or we wouldn't hire them. So let's rely on that. And then let's just put things in this handbook that we think are particularly important. We may talk about our company values and why they aren't just words to us. We may talk about the fact that we don't have unlimited PTO, but we do have a large amount of PTO. And here's why. Here's the thinking behind that. We want you to stay home when you're sick. We want you to have enough time to spend with loved ones and pursue hobbies and whatever. So put things in there that aren't just strictly informative, but things that speak to decisions you make because of the culture you want. So what else should be in an employee handbook? I think it's probably okay to have some sort of contact information if you have a question about who do I contact for benefits info or whatever. Okay, sure. Great. Like, ideally, this handbook is going to be online, and so this is just a matter of a few clicks anyway. I wouldn't want to make this an 80-page document with everything you can think of. So if it's only going to be 5 to 10 pages, what's the most important stuff you could put in there that speaks to the personality of the workplace? So it may be talking to people about, hey, you know what? We are a remote-friendly company, but once a year we strive to get everybody together at an on-site at a changing location every year. So put something in there about that. You can put, that this is a document that people are going to read their first time at the company. This is part of your onboarding process. So it's not just information for you to look up later on, but that a primary reason you have this handbook is day one. What are people going to learn about the company? So take that into account. What are the things that you want them to know? How is someone going to feel welcome? How are they going to get a clear picture painted about who we are, how we do things? So I know some of that guidance gets a little hand wavy there, but I think that the most important piece of guidance that I would have, what should be in an employee handbook, well, make the decision. Is this going to be a covering our corporate butt legal document, or is it going to be an attempt to describe what we think are important cultural tenets of our workplace? Okay, so you make that decision, first of all. If it's going to be a cover your butt thing, then all right, well, get the attorney involved. Go look this stuff up and see which labor laws you need to put in place and which quotes you need from, if you're in the States, from the Department of Labor, the Equal Opportunity Act, these kinds of things. Put all that stuff in there. Okay. Have your attorney sign off on it. If you decide that it's going to be a cultural document, then consider, how can I make somebody feel welcome? How can I make them understand what we think is truly important to us? Put an explanation of our values in there and what they mean to us, examples of how they apply to what we do. Put some of the things in there that are maybe unique to our company. The way we handle PTO or the way we handle birthdays or whatever. Whatever you think is important to you that sets your culture apart. So those are some things that I would recommend for the content of an employee handbook. All right, let's move on here. Before I do that, kind of a subtopic. An employee code of conduct. This is something that you could consider a section within the employee handbook. You could, sure. It is also something that you could consider as a standalone document. Here's the one-pager that we think describes the most important guidance around people's behavior at this company. And so that can talk about communication, it can talk about respect, it can talk about how we handle injustice, how we reduce bias, any of these kinds of things. I think that my opinion is this: you have choices you can make in your employee handbook. It's a legal document. Fine. It's going to be 80 pages and our attorney is going to write it. It's going to be a cultural description. Fine. I think if you're going to have a code of conduct inside your handbook or separately, I think you need to really consider, just like you do with company values, you need to really consider what are the most important pieces of guidance we would give about expected behavior. So remember, performance is on two axes: output, fingers on keyboard, what were you hired to do, and then behavior. How do you act while you do the thing you're hired to do? Do you collaborate well? Do you communicate well? Are you a jerk? These kinds of things. Code of conduct is, these are expectations we have for everybody at the company, regardless of your role, seniority, tenure, and these are the 5, 10 most important bullet points to describe how we want people to act, how we are going to promote a just workplace, how we are going to instill respect, how we are going to reduce bias. Important things about the interaction of infinitely complex human beings. So I think that an employee handbook may or may not touch on some of these things without explicitly calling it code of conduct, but I think it is worth saying we have an employee handbook. It includes these things over here, and we have this one-pager, this code of conduct, that talks about behavioral expectations for everybody in the company. I think that probably covers a number of the bases that you might have in mind when you think of what goes in an employee handbook. That's why I mention it. Okay. Moving on. What's a reasonable cadence for promoting someone? Okay. So my impression of this is, what we're asking is, how often can someone get promoted? Like 3 times a week? Is that too often? I have worked with clients, and I have been a full-time employee at places where promotions are pretty rare. And that's not just because we have a lot of people topping out, like you're already at the senior most step on the ladder and we don't have any place else for you to go, so we don't give promotions very often. More so, it's the result of places that don't have a process for handling promotions where it's the Wild West. And the only time people really get promotions is when they complain loudly enough and it gets to the CEO and the CEO makes a decision. I think that happens often. I think there are plenty of companies that don't think through, how do we want somebody to get promoted here? What's that process look like? Who needs to be involved? How do we make decisions about whether they're ready or not? And there are so many other aspects of people operations that go into these decisions. Do you, for instance, have a document you can point to that says, here's how you know you are succeeding at junior level, mid-level, senior level, principal level? Do we have something that says those things so that we have an attempt at a consistent standard across the company so that our leads don't have to just make this up, but they actually have written guidance on how to determine if somebody might be ready for a promotion? So do we have that? Do we have trained managers who are prepared for what's admittedly a difficult conversation? How do I get promoted here? That's typically not a walk in the park. So do we train our managers to have that conversation? Do we equip our managers? Hey, here's the document on career ladders. Like, this is what you point your people to when they want to know, how do I get to level X+1? This is the document. Do we have a process other than, well, any given time of the year, you just show up and complain enough and the CEO kind of takes your case and makes a decision? Do we say things like, you know what, this can happen annually? Once a year, you do your performance review in January, and within 60 days thereafter, if your review warrants it, then you get a promotion. Other than that, don't ask, because the other 11 months out of the year, we don't do anything. Maybe that's the case. I hope not, because almost everything I just said is terrible. If it's something like we do, let's say, twice a year or quarterly performance reviews of some sort, and after every other one of those, or maybe after every one, I don't know, we have the potential to consider you for a promotion. So is it tied to more frequent reviews? Is it the case that, you know what, maybe we don't do reviews all that frequently, but people can ask to be considered for promotion anytime during the year, but we're still really only going to make them official on these dates? So twice a year, every January, every July, whatever. Do we have timing around it so that we set some sort of a cadence as to when these can actually occur and it's not all made up? These are the sorts of things that your company should have in place and you should train your managers to know about. Okay. So given all of that, a reasonable cadence, I think, is this. Why do we promote somebody? We promote them because they are demonstrably and reliably adding greater value. They are meeting the measures of success for the next level that we have documented at the company. If you're doing all 5 of the things that we say you need to do to rate as a senior instead of as a mid, then you are eligible for promotion whenever that next date rolls around. How often can somebody truly ramp up demonstrably and reliably the value that they are adding? So is it possible for me to go from junior to mid to senior within a month? Can I learn things so fast and display my new expertise so quickly and so often that you're like, well, yeah, I realize we just promoted Keith 2 weeks ago, but I think we should promote him again. Is that possible? Probably not. I don't know what your career ladder documentation looks like. I don't know what your measures of success are for various levels at your company, but the gap between those levels is probably such that you cannot demonstrate that you've achieved the next level within 2 weeks. And in some cases, if it's a thing, for instance, if you have what's hopefully a fairly standard branching career ladder where we go like junior, mid, senior, and then at senior, you can maybe head towards principal, so you're still an individual contributor, but you have room for advancement. Or you go on a management track, so you become a lead, a manager, a director, something like that. If you're at that senior level and you're like, no, I want to be a lead, well, then the sorts of things we want you to be able to demonstrate have to do with people, have to do with projects, probably. And it is not necessarily the case that we always have those available just to throw a new potential manager onto. So you may not have the option to demonstrate higher levels of expertise, new paths of value that you add to the company. You may not have that option any old time you want. You may have to wait until this project ends and the next one fires up for you to try and take on new responsibilities that warrant a promotion. So in some cases, you're going to be limited by opportunities. What you're hopefully never limited by is your lead's ability to give you a proper assessment. Like, hopefully it's not your lead foot dragging or not caring or whatever. So hopefully that's not a constraint. I would say, in general, is it possible for someone to get promoted twice within a year? Could be. Like that does not sound like it's outside the realm of possibility to me. I think that it's probably more reasonable that you would expect a promotion to be in the realm of 1.5, 2 years, something like that. I mean, there's so many caveats here. It's just bizarre. Typically, promotions get further apart in, chronologically, the more advanced you go. So it's more probable that you could go from mid to senior in a year, but less probable that you'd go from senior to principal in a year. When you get to the really advanced stages, like near the top of whatever the career ladder is, it could be multiple years before you are demonstrating value at some new and exciting level such that a promotion is deserved. Senior principal level 3 software engineer. Maybe that's a 3 or 4 year journey to prove that you deserve to be at that level 2 instead of level 1. I don't know, but that's typical. Now, I have seen at client companies, I have seen somebody come in and do such an amazing job that they received a promotion, like they went from producer to senior producer, easily within as less than 6 months. Now, probably that was because there's a couple of factors. One, this person was coming into a place that was fairly lawless. Okay, so this is your game to win. If you're a producer, you're here to instill a sense of order. You're here to keep track of things and show that you're detail-oriented and all of this. This is the perfect environment for you because they didn't have any of that. Okay, so that helps. And then I think that during the interview process, during their evaluation of this person as a candidate, they probably undervalued the skills and expertise that this person was bringing. So they probably looked at them and said, yeah, I guess you're just like you're a producer, when in fact this person was probably already at a senior producer level or close to it. So they were undervalued during the assessment as a candidate, and they were stepping into pretty much a void where they can instill whatever organization they see fit. So those two things led this company to bring this person in as a producer and then promote them to senior producer within just a few months. And it was probably deserved. And then this person got another promotion to whatever, executive producer. Seemingly fairly quickly, maybe a year, maybe less, I don't know. But when you consider that means they got 2 promotions within, let's say, a year and a half, easily less than 2 years. That's fairly quick to get to an executive producer level. But again, I feel as though in this situation, this was somebody who was absolutely knocking it out of the park. They were doing an incredible job, and they were reliably and consistently demonstrating a higher level of value to the company. So it was the right thing for the company to recognize that and promote this person quickly, rather than say, well, it hasn't been a full year yet since your last promotion, so we're going to hold off. No, that was the wrong thing to do in this situation. This person was showing that they grasped the skills, the expertise needed to operate at a higher level, and they should have been rewarded with promotion, compensation, whatever, as a result, regardless of the fact that it seemed to be chronologically happening quickly. So general guidance, reasonable cadence for promoting someone. If it's below senior, so you bring them in at a junior or a mid level, and they're like, well, how do I get to mid or senior from here? Could that happen in less than a year? Yeah, it could. Would I consider that maybe a little exceptional? If it was like 6 to 9 months somewhere, 69 months, 6 to 9 months. I think that might seem a little quick, but again, there could be different circumstances, like there was in the example of this producer, where it's warranted. When you get to how do I go from senior to principal, that's something where you may need, I'm not sure how you would be getting like from mid to senior and senior to principal. I'm not sure how you would do that in less than a year and a half, 2 years. Because a principal level should be, listen, you are solving some of the biggest problems we encounter. So as an individual contributor, you are absolutely near the top of what we could ever expect somebody to do. So should you be able to get from mid to senior and senior to principal within a couple of years? Maybe not. And now this is all kind of talking from the standpoint of, I'm talking about programming, but art, design, animation, maybe standard developer disciplines. If it's something that's sort of outside of that space, if you've got someone in recruiting, if you've got somebody who's office admin, whatever, I don't know that they need to be beholden to a particular level of growth there. I'm not sure I'd look at that and go, well, I don't know how they went from office admin to CEO in 2 years. I don't know. I think that those spaces are maybe a little less defined in terms of the craft we're familiar with in standard game dev disciplines. I think that in any given organization, any given studio, those sorts of roles can be, you know what, you're killing it, here's a promotion. I could see that happening maybe more often. Maybe. I have to think about that. Again, it depends. As in all things people operations, it depends. So reasonable cadence for promoting someone. Well, we had more junior roles could demonstrate being promoted more quickly. The first time you receive a promotion at the company could occur more quickly because maybe we underestimated you when we evaluated you as a candidate. Okay, so that could be. But when we get to more senior roles, going from senior to principal, these are things that probably should take more time because they are demonstrating pretty much top tier competence, and it just that should not be something that we take lightly. Other factors that come into play, if this is somebody who is maybe moving across disciplines, they've been a great animator and they want to be in production now. Okay, that's going to change things. If this is somebody who is moving into a management track for the first time, there may be an absence of opportunities to demonstrate the new skill level. So the things that need to come your way for you to show, I should be senior producer. Maybe they don't come that often. We only launch a game every 5 years, and so your ability to demonstrate how well you manage the first-party submission process only comes along every 5 years, right? So maybe there are some other limitations there that are going to make it trickier to figure out how to promote somebody. One thing you should probably discuss a little bit. Okay, so what if this is a case of I'm working at the company, but I feel like I should be a principal engineer. I've been senior for a while. I feel like I should be principal. I feel like I definitely deserve a pay raise. So I've gone out job hunting and I found some places that might give me this or that. And so I'm basically saying, hey, current employer, make me a counter offer. Like if you want me to stay, you got to promote me now. And you got to give me this pay raise, something like that. Should we entertain such things? And what if we typically have a cadence where it's only every 6 months, January or July? That's the only time we consider promotions. And Keith just came in March because he's trying to get a counter offer out of us. Should we consider breaking our standard cadence? Well, yeah, because it's incredibly expensive to replace team members who leave. And if they are adding value currently and you feel like it's even in the ballpark, like, yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say Keith is a principal right now, but he's a really good senior. So I am sure within the next 3 months, we probably would have considered him to be principal anyway, regardless of this whole counteroffer thing. So if it's in the neighborhood, then I think it's probably worth considering that. It's probably worth considering, yeah, you know what, here's your counteroffer. You get the promotion you want. Please stick around. I think you do have to be careful there. I think that especially if there's compensation that's being requested as part of the counteroffer, you don't want to go wildly outside of your existing pay band for principal engineer to give this person some bonkers amount of money. It's going to be 20% more than your other highest paid principal engineer. That's probably not a thing you want to do. Pay bands are there to make your life easier. So don't just go outside of them on a whim. So there are some other extenuating circumstances that I would consider when we talk about how often to promote someone. Okay, here's our final question for today, probably. Am I wasting my years climbing the ladder in AAA if my end goal is to direct a studio? Okay. So if your end goal is to direct a studio, I know a few people that have started their own studios. And thinking one of them, was he in a more creative role? Was he in a production role when he decided to do that? I honestly don't remember. One person was an engineer. I guess 2 people I can think of that started studios were engineers. So, are you wasting your years climbing the ladder in AAA if your end goal is to direct a studio? Well, I guess part of that is what's the problem you're trying to solve? Like when you say direct a studio, what are you really after there? Is it that you just want to make the game you want to make with the people you want to make? If that's the goal, then maybe what you're really saying is, I don't necessarily want to be in charge of an entire studio, but I would love to be executive director, creative director, whatever. Top creative decision maker. So let's clarify what it is you actually want when you say, here's your end goal. And then what kind of studio you're talking about is another question. So I know a few different people that have started comparatively small studios. They get to make the games that they want. They get to kind of pick the people, these kinds of things. They take on all the risk associated with how do I fund this? How do I keep my people fed? And they're smaller budget indie games. And when they aren't stressed about getting the next payment or drumming up a new publisher, they do enjoy the work and it's fun. Okay. Whereas you could be thinking, hey, you know what? I want to make, it's my dream to make the next giant open world, massively multiplayer game. Okay, well, now you're talking about a different beast. This isn't you and 5 people. So you're looking at something larger. And if it's something where I want photorealistic textures and I want this, that, and the other. Okay, so now you're in the AAA space, and this is dozens, if not hundreds of people. So if you are considering spending years in the AAA space, growing your career, that's probably something you need to do if your end goal is to have a studio that can make a big budget game. If your end goal is to have a studio that can make a 5-person game, that's a different story. Should you spend a whole bunch of time in AAA? Not necessarily. I would say it's almost requisite if your end goal is to have a AAA studio. It's not as much of a requirement if your end goal is to have an indie studio. Now, having said that, incredibly important things you will learn in the AAA space. One, you should be, if we're talking, hey, I want to run a studio eventually, you should be learning everything you can about other disciplines. You should be learning things about how to interact with people, how to lead people well. You should be learning things that are a little harder to come by, how to budget, what's a profit and loss statement, how do I land a contract, how do I negotiate IP rights and rev share and all these kinds of things. That stuff is going to be particularly important to you later on if you want to run your own studio. So you need to be working extra hard to learn in all of these spaces and not just, I started off as a designer and I'm going to continue to be a really good designer and then eventually run my own studio. That's important and not enough because there are all these other areas of knowledge you need to learn about. The likelihood is, if you want to start your own studio, you will need to know a lot of people for many reasons, for business development reasons, for staffing reasons, for emotional support reasons. So building a network is important. You can arguably do that better at a big company because it's easier to get close ties with more people there. So maybe staying in AAA is going to be of greater value to you to build a bigger network. Not necessarily the case. Maybe. Something that when you talk about, am I wasting my years climbing the ladder in AAA? Well, so climbing the ladder, let's talk about that for a moment because we just finished talking about a reasonable cadence for promoting someone. That's, when we talk about promoting someone, we're talking about within a company, right? But most of the big advancement in someone's career comes from changing employers. So this is a time-honored tactic where if you want to go from entry level to CEO the fastest, you could do that spending 20 years at one company. Or you could probably pull it off more quickly with 4 or 5 job hops that are a year and a half, 2 years apart. So do you want to stay at one place for 20 years or go to 5 places over the span of 10 years? So that idea of going between employers is a way for you to climb that ladder that you're talking about more quickly. So those are some thoughts that I would have about, am I wasting my years? Well, so that's really, it's kind of a closed question. It's a yes or no question. No. Am I wasting my years climbing the ladder in AAA? No. is it necessarily the most applicable use of your time? That has a few more questions that need to be answered. So you say your end goal is to direct a studio. Is it? Or is it that you would be happy maybe being a co-founder, or even not co-founder, but hired in at an executive level where you are a creative director? Is that really what you want? Or are you really excited about talking to the accountant and the lawyer every week? So figure out what your end goal actually is. Figure out what space you would like to be in eventually, if you are directing a studio or even a project within a studio. Do you want that to be a big budget extravaganza? Do you want it to be a 5-person indie endeavor? Well, let's figure out what your end goal is here. Then we talk about, are you really wasting your years climbing the ladder in AAA? So I would argue that there are few situations I could picture that would qualify as wasting your years climbing the ladder in AAA, if your end goal is to direct a studio. Difficult for me to picture a scenario in which you are wasting your years climbing the ladder in AAA, if that's where you want to get to eventually. Good questions. Good questions. All right, so that's what I'm pulling out of the inbox for today. And as usual, I'll recommend that folks, if you have questions more about any of this, you can get a free intro call, gamedevcoaching.com. Just schedule a free call with me. The intro is free. I do coaching calls as well. And I'll also point you towards the video series. I just released a spring update for my video series on leadership skills, which we also have linked off at the gamedevcoaching.com website. All right, thanks for your time. We'll catch you next week.